But in this last year in particular, I've been aggressively learning Spanish because I had half decent conversational Spanish before, and now I've worked my way up to fairly decent conversational Spanish. So it's now one of the things that I really strive to do is to attend as many events in the Spanish-speaking community as I can, and then speak to folks in their first language. But if I am reelected, that is definitely something I would like to target next year in the upcoming term, is to reform our parking requirements, because we have antiquated parking requirements. They're enormous for some developments. One thing that's still starting, but that I'm excited about, is the CARE initiative. This is a non-police based emergency responder program. This is something I've been a champion of. I first proposed it a few years ago and didn't have council support at that time, but this council did support it at our retreat a year and a half ago, and that's coming online in just a couple months. But what I found is that you have this ability to go out into the community and facilitate discussions and participate in community events, and that it's really meaningful to people. You can make a real difference in people's lives.
We ain't throwing starfish here, now we're having a good party, talking about structural change. We believe the land is sacred, even beneath that vacant parking lot, where the weeds are doing their best to express the need for something different. Gonna make some space for you and me to live here all together. Gonna make it safe and fun for kids to get around the town. Gonna find me a residential pedestrian district where I can gracefully grow older. Gonna spend my remaining years sharing Boulder.
Hello, Boulder and the wider world. This is the Sharing Boulder podcast. My name is Philip Ogren, and for episode 30, I spoke with Aaron Brockett, the mayor of Boulder. We talked about the all-new direct election mayor's race in Boulder and his candidacy in the upcoming election this fall. We talked about gun violence prevention, affordable housing, ranked choice voting, learning Spanish, the Diagonal Highway Corridor Project, and solutions for unhoused people in Boulder, among others. My goal is to interview as many mayoral and city council candidates as possible, and I hope you enjoyed this first Sharing Boulder candidate interview of the 2023 election cycle. Hello, Honorable Mayor Aaron Brockett. Welcome to Sharing Boulder.
Hello, Philip. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I didn't know that people referred to you as the Honorable until I saw that nasty gram from the guy John Bauer from the FAA. He had referred to you as the Honorable Mayor Brockett, and I don't know if he was being snarky or if that's common. Do people call you that?
It is not common. I prefer the dishonorable, honestly, but when you look up it in titles in like the etiquette books, right? Of course, you have the big etiquette book on your shelf, right?
Obviously.
For a mayor in the U.S., technically it's the Honorable so-and-so.
Okay.
But I get addressed that way very infrequently, which I prefer because I like to go by Aaron rather than some. So.
Well, thank you, Aaron, for coming on the podcast. I wonder, this is a wonderful opportunity for me. I'm going to be interviewing all three mayoral candidates that I know about. You, Nicole Spear, and Bob Yates. And I thought maybe if you could just start off by giving your kind of standard elevator pitch of why you're running for mayor and why we should vote for you.
Yeah, well, we're just getting started on the campaigns. I don't have a finely honed elevator speech, Phil. I can test things out here with your viewers.
But, all right.
Anyway, I've been on the city council for almost 8 years, and I've been mayor for the last year and a half. And in that time, there's a lot of things that I'm proud of that we've taken action on, things like gun violence prevention and adding affordable housing and attainable housing and more mixed-use, walkable neighborhoods, and making progress on our transportation goals, adding bike lanes and better transit service, and moving forward with helping those most in need in our city, adding dozens and dozens of units of permanent supportive housing. There are a lot of things I'm excited about that we've done over the last 8 years, but there's so much left to be done. We have these significant problems in our community and in our society that need our dedication and our effort. And so I am dedicated to continuing the work and continuing the fight, to get that additional amount of affordable and attainable housing, and to provide compassionate solutions to people experiencing homelessness, so that we don't need to have people on our streets, and instead we have safe places for them to be and to live. And to continue to work on climate action and climate crisis. We've got a 100% renewable electricity goal in 2030 that's doable, but it's not going to be easy. And so that's something that I'm excited to work on moving forward with that. And just advancing the causes that would make our city a more just and sustainable and equitable place in general. So, I'm running to make Boulder the inclusive place that it can be and that it deserves to be.
Wonderful. 2030 is not the vague distant future like it used to be. It's like 6.5 years away. So yeah, coming right up. That is ambitious. So I wonder if next you could just give us a quick civics lesson as it relates to electing the mayor, how you got elected to mayor, and how you're hoping to get elected to mayor, just as a review for people who may not be paying attention to what's changing.
Absolutely. So for the last several decades, the mayor in Boulder has been elected from within the council. So the person does not run for mayor separately, has not run for mayor separately, but everybody runs for council. And then after the election, at the first meeting of the city council, the first thing that is done is to elect the mayor for the next 2 years, and from within the council. So people put their names forward, and there's a vote, and sometimes it's unanimous, sometimes it's 5-4 or 6-3, and then that person then serves the role as mayor for the next 2 years. And a lot of times you've known who it's going to be, but sometimes there's surprises, and people change seats to go into the mayor's seat, and anyway, there's a little bit of drama. And that's a relatively unusual way of selecting a mayor. The city of Lafayette also elects from within the council, but there are very few other cities that do it that way. So 3 years ago, there was a ballot measure that was brought forth by citizens for the Our Mayor, Our Choice ballot initiative. And they got their required signatures, and then our council at the time collaborated with them to make a few tweaks to their proposal. And so that was put on the ballot and passed in November of 2020. And what's in that ballot measure was changing to direct election of mayor. So starting this year in 2023, instead of the council picking the mayor, the citizens of Boulder, the voters of Boulder, will select who the mayor is going to be. So for the first time this year, we have two sets of elections. We have a city council election where there are 4 seats up for grabs, and we'll see how many people run for those. And the top 4 vote getters will get those 4 seats, and that's functioning essentially the same as it has in the past. But now there's the separate election for mayor, and people are running for that separately. And then the extra thing about that I'm excited about is that it's being done using ranked choice voting. So, most elections in our society, it's whoever gets the most votes wins the election. And so you might have 7 candidates, and they might be very close to each other, and one person might only get like 38% of the vote and edge out the other folks, and then they win that race. Well, with ranked choice voting, instead, people vote for multiple people in order. They rank their choices, hence the name ranked choice voting. Yeah. And so, if there are 3 candidates, A, B, and C, you can vote, candidate B number 1, candidate C number 2, and candidate A number 3. And let's say that your top candidate B comes in third at first, then candidate B will drop out, and your vote for candidate B will go away, but your second place vote for candidate C will then get assigned to candidate C. And that process continues if you have multiple people in the race until one person receives more than 50% of the vote. It does as many rounds of calculations as necessary to get to that point. And I can pause there if you have any clarifying questions.
Well, yeah, I guess I would just say that, for people not paying attention to, who's who in the city council, perhaps what ranked choice voting means in terms of these 3 candidates is that, you, Bob, and Nicole, is that since it's not a winner take all, it seems to me that people who are inclined to vote for you are also inclined to vote for Nicole ahead of Bob, perhaps. So like if it was winner take all, maybe Bob would have an advantage, uh, because your vote might get split with Nicole's vote. But that seems like less likely to happen because of ranked choice voting. Does that sound
Yeah,
right to you?
it does. And I mean, I'm not going to get too deep into the guessing about who exactly is voting for whom, but just as a to take that point to make it a little more general, is that one of the great things about ranked choice voting is it eliminates a spoiler effect, right?
Yeah.
So like if you had two candidates that, let's say, they're kind of far apart, policy wise, and then I need a third hand here, and then you
Yeah.
had a third person jump into the race who's like very close policy wise to this person,
Yeah.
the
Right.
usual standard that would kind of guarantee the victory of this candidate, assuming they're a viable candidate,
That's
because the voters would split their votes between these two people that are very close to each other. And now instead, we'll try to do this without the third hand. Now instead, let's say you have something like this situation here. Well, maybe one of these people come in third and they drop out, and then those votes go to this person potentially, and then they have a shot against this person who's further away from a policy perspective.
yeah. Yeah.
And so it's one of the really good things about ranked choice voting is that you can have multiple candidates, some of them close to each other, some of them far away, and it doesn't really decrease anybody's chances. Instead, you just make your compelling case to the voters, and if a majority rank you high enough up, you can get
Yeah.
across the finish line.
That's super cool. I'm really excited to see that in action. I'm really, really glad that the people put that into work. Can you remind me who was behind that ballot measure and how that got put on the ballot?
So it was a citizens group. It wasn't any one organized group or faction, but they called themselves Our Mayor, Our Choice.
Right.
And I don't want to list people because I'm going to forget some, but one person who stands out was now council member Matt Benjamin.
Okay, that's
Was
what I thought.
involved in that effort. But there were a number of folks who participated, and they worked super hard, and they got it on the ballot, and they're making change happen.
Yeah, that is really cool. So I'm excited to see that in action. Are there any other like democratic reforms in that sort of category of reform that are coming down the pike that people are excited about, or is that we're kind of like we've moved on to other things now?
Yeah, it's a great question. Do you mind if I just say one more thing about ranked choice voting first?
Yeah, of course.
Which is another positive thing about it is that it encourages positive races, and because you have a chance at the second place or third place votes of other people's supporters, and so
Right.
it really discourages attack campaigns and mudslinging and such. Because if you go really hard after one of your opponents, their voters are not going to list you as second or third or at all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
thing that they've found is in other cities is that it really increases the positivity of the campaigns. And
Well,
we generally haven't had much negative campaigning here in Boulder, which I really appreciate our political system. And I think it's going to help it keep going that way and actually be even better for the mayor's races.
yeah. Well, I noticed the three of you were very friendly at the Raucous Caucus and being very, very polite and cordial to each other. I thought that was great.
Yeah, well, that's my standard MO anyway. So,
Yeah.
I really appreciate not having an incentive to act differently. I don't think I would, but it's to line up with my actual values. But you were asking about other electoral reforms that might be coming down the pike. And I would say that there's nothing like directly in the hopper right now, to switch metaphors. But one thing that's being looked at is how do we bring maybe it's ranked choice voting to the council races as well.
Okay.
And that is less straightforward because there are multiple people, you have multiple votes. And so it gets more complicated. And I think it takes a little bit more study and consideration about exactly how you implement that. And there are different ways of approaching it. There are kind of subtle differences in how you can approach that. And so that's something I'm interested in exploring in the city. And we've talked about having a working group come do a deep dive on what the options might be there and potentially make some recommendations. So if I am reelected this fall, that's definitely something I'd be interested in looking into.
Very cool. Well, I guess it deserves just a quick shout out that we're switching to even year elections for city council, which has already passed. So that's not really coming down the pike, but it's like in the process of being implemented, and we'll we'll see that for the first time next go around.
Not quite next go around, so they'll walk us through that as well. So normally council terms are 4 years, and going forward, eventually the mayor term will be 2 years. That was what was in the ballot measure. But for this election, all the terms are 3 years for both council and mayor, and that's to get us from odd year to even year elections. So people's terms from this fall will end in 2026 when we switch to even years. And then, but we have one more election before then, which is in 2025. So that's the last odd year election. And those folks, the mayor won't be up, but the council members in that election will also get 3-year terms. So the people elected in 2025 will get 3 years to get them to 2028.
Okay.
And then terms will go back at that point to 4 years for council, and the 2-year term for mayor will start in 2026.
Okay. Well, I hope we're not putting our listeners to sleep with this wonky electoral stuff. But I just remembered one more thing that surprised me, and that is if you lose this mayor's race, you don't have a fallback option to be on city council. So why? Can you explain that, and why is that the case?
Yeah. For the electoral stuff, I should have had a Katie Porter whiteboard where I could write things down and
totally
explain it that way. But So if I don't win this election, then I'm done with city council, and I'll ride gracefully off into the sunset and go enjoy a lot more hikes and travel and all that kind of stuff.
You're not gonna deny the election results?
Absolutely not. I will absolutely trust them. Our county clerk, Molly Fitzpatrick, does an amazing job, and her office is top notch. But yeah, no, I have been mayor, for the last year and a half, and I've seen how you can make a difference in that role. Because I think when you become the public face of the city as mayor, and so you don't have any more powers, right? Your vote is just one of 9. You facilitate the meetings, but that's not a power thing. But what I found is that you have this ability to go out into the community and facilitate discussions and participate in community events, and that it's really meaningful to people. You can make a real difference in people's lives by, like, say, going to a school group and talking to 9-year-olds about civics, and they learn a lot and they're excited, and they go home and they talk to their parents about how they learned about local government from the mayor, and but also being a channel between the community and the council, so that I'm out at events all the time, representing the city, and then oftentimes people will come up to me and they'll ask me a question about something they're concerned about or that's bothering them, and hopefully I'll have the answer. A lot of times I do, sometimes I don't. I take their contact info down, I go back and talk to city staff, get their concern addressed, write them back. So I feel like I've been able to make a real difference, partly on the policy side, but also just in terms of being an interface between the government and the city as a whole. And that's a role I'd like to continue in, and in that particular one. And if it doesn't work out, that's fine.
I guess thank you for that explanation and description of your experience. But I was actually pointing out to something a little more arcane than that that the way the election is actually set up, you can't run for both. And that kind of surprised me. I kind of assumed that if you ran for mayor, it wouldn't necessarily preclude you from also running for city council. But I guess that makes it really kind of complicated to have contingencies like that.
Yeah, and there were some disagreements on this. So when the ballot measure came forth, it included that provision that you not be able to run for both. And city council did collaborate with them on the final ballot measure, and we had some people advocate for being able to run for both. But the mechanics of it get really complicated. Like, do you vote for somebody twice, like for mayor and for council?
Yeah.
Which one takes precedence? And then if they win mayor but they don't win council, who gets selected to council? Or so there's some technical ways that it gets complicated, but also there was a feeling like, you should actually, if you want to be mayor, you need to just run for mayor and take that chance and that risk.
You may have touched on this already. I had a couple softball questions for you. And one was just like, what are you most excited about? What are you proudest of your time as mayor that you kind of like look back and you think, man, I'm really glad I was part of that?
There's a lot to choose from. I feel like we've gotten a lot done over the last 8 years. So I will call out some specifics. The passing the assault weapons ban is something I'm very proud of. which we did not once but twice. After the first time that we passed in 2018, it got overturned, actually right before the King Soopers tragedy. But then we went, after the state legislature gave us the clear ability to do so, we went back and passed a full suite of gun violence prevention measures, 7 of them, banning assault weapons, adding a mandatory waiting period, raising the age to purchase a weapon, and several others as well. So I'm really proud that we did that. We did it in conjunction with other cities too, and provided a kind of a new national model for how cities can work together to affect that kind of change.
Okay, I'm sorry, but this is not an issue I've paid any attention to. I'm aware of it, but I'm kind of very focused on housing and land use issues. So what does a ban on assault rifles mean? Like people can't own them or can't bring them into the city, or
yeah, so you can't purchase them. You also cannot possess them. So you actually are not allowed to carry around an assault rifle in the city of Boulder. Now, we did add a provision that said if you already owned one when the measure was passed, you can keep it. And there's a sort of, it's not a registration, but there was a way of kind of validating that weapon was owned previously. But other than that, yeah, you're not allowed to possess an assault weapon in the city of Boulder.
That's great. Thanks for working on that. You kind of had a cadence like you were going to start off with that and move on to something else. Was there other things you wanted to highlight?
I do have others. The city has been creating affordable housing at a rapid pace. It's been the last few years. It's been over 200 in each of the last several years units of permanently de-districted housing, and a little bit slower pace before that. But still, in the last 8 years, there's been hundreds and hundreds of units added. And well, of course, that problem is still enormous. There's a lot of work left to be done. That's thousands of people who have an affordable place to live that wouldn't otherwise. And many of those units have been permanently supportive housing for people transitioning out of homelessness. So these are apartments for folks that were out on the streets, and they're provided with wraparound services so that they have caseworkers and people who help them with any other issues they might be having in their life. So it's a housing first model, and there are dozens and dozens of people who've gotten off the streets and into safe housing through those initiatives. And that's something I'm very proud of as well. One thing that's still starting, but that I'm excited about, is the CARE initiative. This is a non-police based emergency responder program. And this is modeled on the STAR program in Denver, which has been extremely successful. And it sends out an EMT, a paramedic, and a social worker as a team instead of a firefighter or a police officer to cases, calls that don't involve public health threats or threats to the public. And this has been shown to really improve outcomes on the calls and not need police backup. And so it increases the success rate of the calls, and then also takes burden off the fire department and the police department so that they can work on more serious calls that they're distracted from otherwise. So this is something I've been a champion of. I first proposed it a few years ago and didn't have council support at that time, but this council did support it at our retreat a year and a half ago, and that's coming online in just a couple months. I'll just mention one other thing, which is transportation changes take a very long time. So there's nothing apparent on this one, but we have a bus rapid transit project from Boulder to Longmont that we've been working on for many years. And just last week, we got the $25 million federal grant that fully funds the project. And so this is going to be a separated bus lane within town, and then at all the major intersections along Highway 119, so that buses will be able to slip past all of the stop traffic. And it also includes a regional bikeway. So there'll be a grade separated bikeway between Longmont and Boulder. If you've ever tried to bike on the diagonal highway, it's terrifying.
Yes, it is.
It really
not the safest feeling.
No, absolutely not. But with the advent of e-bikes, that's a very doable commute or journey.
Yeah.
And so regional bikeway, I think, is going to make a huge difference, and it's going to speed time up for everybody who travels on that corridor. So while that won't be complete for several more years, the most important part is getting all the money lined up.
Yeah,
and
congratulations.
So that was huge. I was part of a lobbying delegation a few months ago to Washington, D.C. to lobby for this specific grant, and it's really exciting to see that come through.
That's great. Well, as someone who commutes regularly on the US 36 bikeway, the prospect of having another one on going up to Longmont is wonderful. I go up to Niwot frequently, and so that's really great. Um, just to circle back, when does the CARE program go into effect? When will we start seeing those kind of service response calls that you described?
We're hoping to get that started in September. So they're in the hiring process right now. And so they've made a couple key hires and they still have to hire the rest of the staff.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that's all very encouraging. Thank you for that. Okay. So, one more softball. What are you kind of most frustrated by, from your time on city council and as mayor? Like,
I'd say that the most frustrating thing is the pace of change. Getting things done takes a long time.
yeah,
And that's been built into our processes for a long time. Like we've erred towards the cautious side on the city of Boulder. There have
yeah,
been some good reasons for that, but when you're trying to work on problems that people are suffering from today, it would be great to get changes made sooner than that. And then we had that true already, and then COVID hit, and it was all about emergency response to that crisis. And then coming out of COVID, we had enormous staff shortages, which we shared with pretty much every other organization in the world, but they were even a little bit worse for the city. So we didn't have the staff capacity to get initiatives done as quickly as we would have liked last year. Fortunately, those staff shortages are finally easing up, and the pace of change is coming more rapidly. And I'm looking forward to getting a lot of additional ordinance passed in these next few months that I think are really going to make a difference for folks.
cool. So, well, one thing I wanted to ask about that is I always think about the pace of change being sort of built in, baked into the processes, the rules for the rules, so to speak, more than the staffing shortage. So I'm glad you reminded me about that. But I wonder if, like, I remember when you were reelected in 2021, 2019. I guess when was it that there was sort of a 6-3 supermajority of I mean, like, it's a nonpartisan city council, so it's hard to say, but
Like after the 21 election, where we had maybe more folks who are housing friendly and
sure,
maybe justice oriented, something like that.
yeah, and perhaps more willing to like change the rules for the rules, for increasing the pace of change. So yeah, I'm kind of just curious, like, how is that going? Are we gonna like fix the rules for the rules, or is I don't even know how to ask the question, because I'm not a policy person on this issue, but I'm kind of curious, like, well, like, and just kind of like the intuition I have is just because you have some great idea that you want to see passed, and just because you get elected to city council doesn't mean you show up to a city council meeting one night and be like, hey, let's vote on this thing I care about. There's just a lot of work that goes into each ordinance that gets passed. And I guess I want to ask, is the current process working, or are we trying to reform that, or where do we stand with that sort of?
Yeah, and I think it can use some reforming. So we do have a very deliberate approach to passing ordinances, and part of that is important. Like, you need to do public outreach on an issue that matters to our community, right? You want to have a public meeting, you want to have an email from the city. It's good to have some surveys, gauge people's opinions on things, right? So public outreach is an important part of the process, but up to a certain level, and maybe past a certain level, you're really just delaying things, right? If you've had a chance to get everybody's opinion once, you don't necessarily need to get it a second, a third, and a fourth time. So I think we've been more willing in the last 18 months to say, okay, everybody's opinion really matters to us. We want to hear it. Let's take it into account, and then let's make a decision. And it could go one way or the other, but let's go ahead and make a decision, not have analysis paralysis and wait for many more months or years to move forward on something. And one thing that we've done as well is, a lot of the things that we work on are in the planning department's area. And they've had a lot of staff shortages, and they often are held back by some of the complexities of the code and some requirements. And so something I said at a meeting at our was actually at our midterm retreat, and I've said it personally to the planning department folks as well, is to say, if you see roadblocks that are really holding you up from getting the work done that you need to do, and you can't remove the roadblock yourself, it's written into the code somewhere, come back to us and let us know about that. And can't guarantee we change it, but I'm very open to considering changes to make your processes easier and more doable. And we've actually started to see some changes around that, so that we're working on one project right now about zoning for affordable housing, which is changing thresholds for how many units you can have on a site to encourage smaller units that are less expensive. And there's a lot of details to that. But staff, as part of their investigation of that process, brought back, I think it was 2 or 3 or 4 things that are related to that. And they said, we've always been hung up on this little detail and that little detail. So we're recommending a couple of additional changes here. And those are getting rolled into the larger package, and it'll make the processes more smooth going forward. And I'd love to see us continue to take that approach.
That's great. Are those set of reforms, do they include parking changes to the parking minimums for the affordable housing?
It does not. This does not. It was really about zoning thresholds and numbers of units and things like that. But if I am reelected, that is definitely something I would like to target next year in the upcoming term, is to reform our parking requirements, because we have antiquated parking requirements. They're enormous for some developments in ways not appropriate to a sustainable city.
I sit on the housing advisory board, as you know, and we had a wonderful speaker, Laura Rosbert, who came and talked about parking utilization. She came with a bunch of data talking about how much parking gets utilized at affordable housing complexes. And the answer is very little. There's a lot of empty parking that sits there that space could have been used for more intensive housing, So if you need some data, there it exists.
Yeah. And I'll just mention, like, the Diagonal Plaza redevelopment that's happening right now is replacing some of those big old decaying parking lots with housing, 25% of which is deed restricted affordable. So I love to see it.
That's great. That's great. Well, so this is an exciting time of year. The Raucous Caucus happened. Was it just last week? I think it was. And that was a really fun event. I went and I saw you and Nicole and Bob get up and give some speeches. I really enjoyed that event. It was actually, it was surprisingly friendly, and people came and they were very positive. It seemed like people were excited to just be in the room together. And it's fun to just see these candidates get up and they're excited about the city for different reasons. And it kind of reminds you that, I'm excited about Boulder for a variety of reasons. And I don't know, it was a fun event. But one thing I wanted to highlight from that was, and I misremembered that you actually corrected me just a little bit, but there was a pop quiz round, quick round, lightning round is what they called it, where you had a yes/no paddle to answer very difficult questions with a blunt answer. And one of them was, do you support fourplexes everywhere throughout the city? Which I kind of assumed there'd be a few no's and a few yeses. And the way I remember saying it, everyone did yes, but you were on the opposite side from me. And then you sort of corrected me and said, well, you were kind of waffling on that one. But I'm curious, how, maybe you could just speak to that policy change that I would love to see.
Right. I wouldn't use the word waffling, but what is I didn't use yes or no. But this is something where allowing for multifamily housing in single family neighborhoods is something that we're getting started on. And so I think it's a process. I think it's a good direction to move in for a more sustainable city, to have some additional units, kind of gentle infill, in parts of town where you are close to services and such. So I think it's a good idea to be moving that direction. We just, in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, greenlit moving forward with considering duplexes and triplexes on larger lots in some of the zones in the city. And so we'll be considering that later this year. And it's not everywhere, but it's a potential good start, because larger lots have some more room for some of those housing types. And then we're going to be looking at it in the 2025 comprehensive plan update. This is something that happens every 10 years when we do a major update to the comprehensive plan. And because what we're hearing from our planning folks is that we actually have rules baked into the comprehensive plan that actually wouldn't allow you to just say quadplexes everywhere.
Yeah.
So we actually couldn't do that next week if we wanted to, even if it had lots and lots of support and we want to move forward on it. So the comprehensive plan will be the place to visit that and to talk about, like, okay, how much attached housing in where and in what ways, should we consider for the next 10 years of the city's evolution. And I did the neither yes or no, because I think it's important to preserve the flexibility to go out and talk with the community and say, like, okay, once in 10 years, what's our future for the next 10 years? Like, let's have a big community conversation. And I'm absolutely interested in pursuing those multifamily options. But exactly what that looks like or what comes next is a question. And I also, one thing when we talk about more multifamily housing that I also think about connections to services, because we do have some pretty far flung parts of our town that are currently single family only, where it's very hard to walk or bike to anything and you're not near transit. So then I get more cautious about, denser infill in those parts of town that don't have those same connection to services. So that's my nuanced kind of approach. These are directions to go in. We have several steps to take, and we need community outreach as part of that.
Yeah, density that's car dependent probably doesn't help our climate goals, for example.
Exactly. And where we've targeted the real denser multifamily housing, like the 3 and 4 story buildings, that's always along the transit corridors and near services, and I think it's important to keep that in mind.
I thought you were going to say you didn't want to rule out 5 plexes everywhere throughout the city.
We can talk about that too.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a funny question because, a lot of times it's framed as duplexes and triplexes. And so the fact that they kind of came out swinging with 4 plexes makes you wonder, why didn't they, ask you about 5 plexes and 6 plexes? It's because, it's not, but it kind of speaks to what you just said, is like, there needs to be community conversation around this to have some good answers around it, or good discussion, find out what people want. So then the other thing that was notable at the Raucous Caucus was your speech on homelessness, and I'm trying to remember what the question was given. I think it was about funding for camping sweeps, and whether that was useful to do. And then you respond. I'm not sure if you answered that specifically. Maybe I'll just let you just run with that. I don't remember what the question was now, but you get it.
Well, I won't try to answer whatever that question was exactly, but just in terms of thinking about, what do we do about the problem of homelessness in our community? And this is an enormous problem. And it's, I would say, the most difficult problem that we struggle with in town. And it is part of a broader societal failure, right? There are rising levels of unsheltered homelessness across our entire country. And it's very hard to deal with these issues at the municipal level with the resources that we have. But I think what's important is that we're trying to get people off the streets and into safe places and into housing. And so we're bringing our day services center online in the next few months, which is going to be a good step forward, give people a safe, warm place to be instead of being on the streets or in the library. People are welcome to be in the library, but its primary purpose is not as a place to stay all day, check out a book, that's great. But instead, this will give folks a place to go where they can get a warm shower and a hot meal, and then take that next step on getting housed, whether that's getting a birth certificate so that they can apply for disability benefits, whether it's connecting with a mental health provider to help with a mental health issue. So I think that's going to be a significant increase in our services, but we got to keep offering more. And in particular, we need more mental health and substance abuse solutions. That not everyone who is experiencing homelessness has those issues, but there's a strong correlation. And Colorado ranks, I think it's 49th in mental health supports. So that's an area where we have to do more. And I'm working hard on partnering with the county about how we can stand up additional services in that area. But we do actually have our first group home for substance abuse recovery that the city is co-implementing with the county that's coming online in just the next few months. We need more things like that. We need more group homes. We need to give people more options. We also need more transitional options, right? Right now, we're trying to get as many people into apartments as we can, but we don't have enough apartments available for everybody. So there are things that you can do more quickly and at a lower cost, such as safe outdoor space like they have in Denver, which are these heated ice fishing tents where people can stay with communal kitchens and bathrooms, or tiny home villages, which Denver has implemented very successfully. Longmont is in the process of putting one together that's almost done now up in Longmont. So these kinds of transitional options, these also provide an option for some folks aren't able or willing to go to the shelter at night for various reasons, and where they very well might go to a safe outdoor space or a tiny home village. So you're giving people additional options to get them off the streets. So we got to keep working on providing more of those compassionate solutions for folks. But I will say that in the meantime, if somebody sets up a tent in the middle of a sidewalk or an underpass or in a public park, I don't think we should just let those stay. Those public spaces are there for the use of everyone in the public. And for example, if you're a parent with a couple of young kids and you don't have a lot of money and you don't have a yard and you don't have a playground of your own, like you need to be able to go to that public park, let the kids run around and climb on the jungle gyms and what have you. And if there's a 30-person encampment set up all around the playground, well, you're very unlikely to use that space, or you may be physically impossible. So I don't think the answer is to just let tents stay wherever they are, which is why I do support us continuing to require people to move. But you need to do it every single time with the conjunction of offering services and giving people as many solutions as possible in the meantime. So that's the balance that I would strike or do strike in these conversations.
Yeah. When you spoke about it at the Raucous Caucus, I seem to remember that you said something about some new monies or dedicated tax that was coming online. Can you describe what that was? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. That's really important because this Proposition 123 was passed at the state level just last year. And it's dedicating hundreds of millions of dollars statewide towards affordable housing and also housing for people experiencing homelessness. And the city stands to get millions of dollars from that, and it will provide a significant funding boost to our efforts in this area. So it gives us this new opportunity to implement some of these solutions, whether it's apartments or tiny home villages or other things, to give people a safe place to live. So it's a new and unique opportunity with that funding stream that allows us to really make a difference.
That's great. So will that go to like the CARE program, or is that more likely to go towards building new permanently affordable housing like SROs or something like that? Or
yeah, I think it's more in the housing area.
Okay.
I think less on operational programs and more on housing. But it's a complicated measure, so I'd have to delve into all the details to be precise in answering the question.
Okay. Well, thanks for discussing that. All right. Well, I've got just a couple more things for you. One is I want to channel David Adamson for just a moment, who was early supporter of the podcast and helped out with a bunch of the early episodes. He, as you know, he is doing this fantastic visionary work of trying to put some denser housing across the street from his own home. And I love everything about that project in terms of it doesn't challenge the neighborhood character. It allows you to build a footprint that is similar to a large mansion that routinely gets built there, but allows more people to live there with covenants in place to help with parking, so that everyone who lives there doesn't bring a car, so shared cars and shared space upstairs. I guess I should have backed up and just said that the house will have rooms in it such for a co-housing arrangement. Sorry, a cooperative housing arrangement, and shared space. So I believe the current plan is to use the city charter, the city ordinance for co-housing. But I'm sorry.
Cooperative housing.
I'm sorry. Yeah, cooperative housing. I don't know why I don't confuse them in my mind. I just confuse the words. Um, but he's had a lot of difficulty pulling that off. I really am sad that the micro condos option wasn't possible. Um, and I'm just curious if there's anything at the city level that would make a project like that easier, or is there any appetite politically or mechanically speaking for housing pilots like that? Is there anything else going on that's similar to that we might look to in the next coming years?
Well, there's nothing queued up right now, but I've talked to David about this idea for many years, and I've always supported it. I've always thought it was a great idea, and would love to see it get implemented. And then the challenge is how do you get that on the work plan? And this is where we always have trouble, which is that staff capacity is limited. There are only so many things you can undertake at one time, and so it's never gotten to the top of the work plan queue. But I think it has potential, and so it's something the next council I think should consider. Because I think you could do a pilot program where you could set up parameters and say, hey, under these circumstances, you could do these kinds of housing that are more dense than are typically allowed in the zone, but under these circumstances with shared car arrangements and smaller units and, et cetera, you could set up something that took this into account. So I think that'd be great. And it's just a question of finding the time to get something like that done. And of course, having a majority of council willing to take it on.
Yeah, well, I would love to see, kind of more abstractly, I would love to see something happen around the issue of um, anticipating and having like covenants for in place mechanisms for having car light units, where you say, in exchange for this density, you promise increased density or increased number of units on a particular lot. You agree to have fewer cars, or not a car for every adult that would live there. Because it's kind of like one of my core beliefs is that um, as we add people to Boulder, we really ought to be decreasing the number of cars, and allow and anticipate for people to have car light living arrangements that are make it easy for people to live there. So I don't know. Have you anticipated having a lot more people live here without cars?
Oh yeah, I think that it would be great. I mean, I think we already have provisions for that in a number of areas, like some of our newer, denser housing. The requirements are that the parking be shared, unbundled, managed, and paid, so that decreases the amount of cars that they're owned separately by individuals. But I think we should push it further. The Boulder Junction area has parking maximums instead of parking minimums. I think that's a great thing to apply citywide. In the right. You adjust it to get the right maximums that are allowed. But I think we should continue to pursue a lower car future. It's important for our sustainability.
Yeah. So I don't remember how you might have weighed in on this, but I was disappointed that the ADU update didn't come with striking down parking restrictions in that update. Do you remember how that unfolded and why that wasn't included?
Yeah, I mean, it's very simple. It's because you can waive the parking requirement if you just pledge to rent it at a below market rate. So
Oh,
it's actually we essentially don't have a parking requirement. You just have to, if you don't have a parking spot, you have to go sign a piece of paper that says, if I ever rent it, I won't rent it for more than 80% of what similar one bedrooms rent, in new buildings.
I'm kind of embarrassed that I forgot about that because one of the interesting facts about the current set of ADUs, is that most of them are affordable already, whether or not they're designated affordable. Yeah, that's a good response because most of those units aren't gonna. It doesn't actually change the rent they would charge. It just adds one layer of, hey, if you want to forego the parking spot, you have to sign this piece of paper, I guess.
Right. Yeah. And there was a bit of a narrative in some parts of the community saying like, oh, they missed a chance to remove the parking requirements. But I felt it was a little unfair because it's very, very easy to waive that parking requirement.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for reminding me of that, or kind of updating my own little narrative I had kicking around in my brain.
Sure.
Um, Okay, well, I've kind of gone through my outline of things that I wanted to ask you about, and we're near the top of the hour of the interview. Um, so I think maybe I'll just let give you a chance to say anything else that's on your mind.
Yeah, can I address one other topic that we haven't had a chance to hit yet?
Yeah, sure.
Well, so one of the things that I've been passionate about in my time on council and as mayor is outreach to our immigrant communities. So I've spent a lot of time with our Nepalese community, which is our second largest international community here in town. We have a substantial Nepalese population. And so I have some good friends in that community and support them whenever I can. Some great folks over there. And then, of course, our largest international population is our Latino community. Many of whom are Spanish first speakers. And so I've always done what I can to visit and support folks in that community. But in this last year in particular, I've been aggressively learning Spanish because I had half decent conversational Spanish before, and now I've worked my way up to fairly decent conversational Spanish. So it's now one of the things that I really strive to do is to attend as many events in the Spanish speaking community as I can, and then speak to folks in their first language. And I think that kind of outreach is really important because those are folks who often aren't included in the city's decision-making spaces. And so when I talk about connecting people to city government, that's been one of my big initiatives is connecting more with our Latino and Hispanic Spanish-speaking populations, and something that I'm excited to continue to do if I'm reelected.
That's great. So that was a little hand wavy for me. I'm kind of curious, like what's something that stands out of what you've learned by kind of listening more carefully to those communities?
Well, I think there's some different sets of concerns, and I guess part of it is about like having children who are language learners, right? That's a more challenging situation at school. And so BVSD does a great job in doing bilingual learning. Like I visited Columbine not long ago in a bilingual Columbine Elementary in a bilingual class, and there's some great teachers there doing good work. But when you have parents whose kids need more resources and they're maybe working overtime to make enough money to afford town, and maybe their English isn't perfect as well, these are folks that need some additional supports that folks who are maybe English first people don't need as much of. So this is something where we've been adding translation services to our city more and more. We have our first Spanish-speaking board member on the Human Relations Commission, and we're adding more and more Spanish services when we go out into the community. So I think that's just incredibly important because these are folks who need more support than maybe some other people in our community.
That's great. The thing I kind of anticipated that you might say something about housing and how the affordable housing crisis affects those communities. Is there anything kind of salient to say about that that's kind of particular to those communities, or is it kind of it affects everybody?
I mean, it does affect everyone, but our more recent immigrants kind of correlate somewhat with folks who have lower income brackets. So it is a particular problem in some of the immigrant communities, and it's one of the reasons why our affordable housing efforts are so incredibly important. But also, in particular, many of the Latino, Latinx families live in our mobile home parks, which is our biggest reservoir of naturally occurring affordable housing in the city. And so supporting those communities is incredibly important. And the council over the years has done many things to improve our support for the mobile home parks. And it's extremely important that we continue to do that. And there's some particular infrastructure challenges in some of them that I've been working on finding ways to help out with. We've had some great successes at the Ponderosa Mobile Home Park, but we have a lot further to go with, say, Orchard Grove, which has an aging water system, or San Lazaro on the edge of town, which also has an aging water system and needs to be annexed to the city and helped with their infrastructure. So that's a huge way of supporting some of our immigrant and as well as other low-income folks in town.
Well, I have followed that Ponderosa project where they've been adding kind of permanent structure houses, multifamily houses there. and I believe that are some of those like modular home style buildings that we're contemplating ramping up with the housing factory on the BVSD property on East Arapahoe.
That's exactly right. Yeah, because what we're doing is it's this 20-year project essentially is we're building new housing along the western edge. And then folks who want to are moving from their mobile homes into that new multifamily housing. And as they do that, their mobile homes will be replaced by new fixed foundation housing. And they will be modular homes built in the modular home factory that's being built over on the BVSD property at 63rd Street. So that's not done yet, hasn't broken ground yet. So it'll be a little while. But for the first number of years, the modular home output from that factory will go to families in the Ponderosa Mobile Home Park.
I don't know the answer to this. Does the scale of that proposed factory going to, like allow for doing the same thing in some of the other mobile home neighborhoods that you just mentioned, or is it kind of too small to really tackle those larger neighborhoods?
I think the output will be more than just Ponderosa needs, so there'll be other opportunities. But you need a process and buy-in from a community before you start replacing those homes with fixed foundation homes. So we don't have that underway to agree to that. But if there were a community that were interested in taking this approach, it could help out with that.
Okay, great. All right. Well, you said you had one more thing and you just said it. So is there anything else that comes to mind of things you want to touch on?
Now, this has been a great conversation, Philip. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Well, I really am honored that, you honored me with the Honorable Mayor Brockett on the podcast here, and good luck in the election this fall. And thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And I believe I was the first interviewee on the podcast as a whole. Do I have that right?
That's right. Yes. That's a good point. You are the first person to be to come back. You're the first alumnus to return to the podcast. So thank you for being a supporter of the podcast. Appreciate it.
So the honor is all mine to have been the first interviewee and now the first mayoral candidate and the first returner. So appreciate it.
Yeah, great. Okay. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Gonna find me a residential pedestrian district where I can gracefully grow older. Gonna spend my remaining years sharing Boulder.
Thank you for listening to Sharing Boulder. Please support the podcast by sharing it with your friends and neighbors. You can contact me at linktree.com/Philip Ogren, which you can find by DuckDuckGoing Linktree Philip Ogren, or by visiting sharingboulder.us, where you can also find show notes and previous episodes. This episode of Sharing Boulder was produced by Philip Ogren, and the music was created by Nathaniel Ogren and Sack Lunch. Keep sharing, Boulder.